Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. As some of you may be aware, I'm the author of the 9-part Two-Face series. So there are 9 books in the original Two-Face series, and then there's a sort of a follow-up series which kicks off with the third confession that was following the brief publication of Shan'ann Cadle's book Letters from Christopher. That series is incomplete. There are 2 books written of the trilogy. I must still write Silver Fox Post-Truth. I scheduled that book for August, but it might be slightly later than that. It's also possible that it'll come out in August. I'm just not 100% sure at this point. A recent review for Silver Fox, the third confession, puts the rating of that book equally the highest of all the books in the series. So it's the highest rating at 4.2 out of 5 stars, tied with Annihilation, which is another book from the original Two-Face series. So if you want to read some of the books that I've written on Chris Watts, the 2 best books are Silver Fox, The Third Confession, and Two-Face Annihilation. So you can check those out. They are available on Kindle and in paperback if you're interested. Before we start with today's review of the timeline, 2 years ago today, regarding Chris Watts, I just want to thank the 100 or so people who've subscribed since the last video. I think by the time you watch this video, there'll be around about 13,300 subscribers. So welcome. Thank you for joining me here. It's sort of humbling. There's some channels out there with over 100,000 subscribers, but certainly in my case, it's been slower growth. One reason being I focus a lot more on certain cases, and I don't always go with the popular route. If you check out my timeline, the Vincent van Gogh videos I don't think there's more than 1 or 2 that have been viewed more than 1,000 times. But it nevertheless is something I'm very interested in, and I think it's one of my best, the book is one of my best books and some of the strongest research I've done in 7 years of true crime, and I think it could actually change art history. So following this video, I'll be doing another video in the 130 years ago today Van Gogh. I appear on camera on that, just not 100% comfortable appearing on camera, but I'm kind of doing it to try and draw attention to the story of Van Gogh, and it's reaching its climax now. There are only 2 or 3 letters to go, and obviously around about 2 weeks from today, Vincent van Gogh suffered a fatal bullet wound. He had internal bleeding for around about 30 hours before he died. And so after being shot, he could also talk to people and express kind of what is going on. And that's part of how and why I'm challenging the whole suicide narrative. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. There's also a Patreon channel with supplementary content, including on the Chris Watts case with almost 200 separate posts, audiobooks, and an analysis. So the Patreon channel you can join for around about $1 a month for multiple posts every single day. So if you're enjoying the analysis on the YouTube channel, which is free, you might get even more enjoyment, and also the interactions with the people, the community on Patreon. So check that out. Okay, and so without any further ado, let's start with today's episode. And today we're dealing with 2 days in the timeline, July 13th and July 14th. Now I wanted to juxtapose these days. It is sometimes important to put elements of the timeline in side by side so that there's a very real sense of continuity, and that one gets a sense of, oh, that happened because of that. It's not always possible, because sometimes the days are separated, or the events are separated across several days, and not everyone wants to listen to a 2 or 3 hour episode. That is also what makes the narratives quite special, is in the narratives the timeline is dealt with decisively in one go, so you can read as far and as fast as you like. And that's often when reality kind of really sinks in, when you see it all in one long sort of narrative. I'm talking about the timeline. An example of what I'm talking about is Vivint. The fact that Shan'ann was worried about the Vivint sensor, and she seemed to sort of forget about it, but actually she didn't, as we'll see on, I think it's July 15th, which is something I'm not dealing with in this episode, but just to remind you that the Vivint thing was still in play. It still wasn't fixed by around about a week after Shan'ann was kind of upset about it. Anyway, let's deal with July 13th. Chris Watts checks Facebook, and that was quite unusual for him. It was Friday the 13th in 2018. Watts called Shan'ann. 7 minutes later, he called her a second time. Now, that's also quite unusual. It was quite unusual. It was sort of more common that Shan'ann would call him, and then Shan'ann would sometimes also call him back again. This time it was swapped around. Watts called Shan'ann, then after 7 minutes he called her again. And 2 hours later, Watts logged into Facebook. So it suggests that he found out on July the 13th, Friday the 13th, what had gone down kind of behind his back on Facebook, not on Shan'ann's account, but elsewhere. Now, probably what had happened was he hadn't seen this for himself on Facebook. He'd been told by his mother, maybe by his father, maybe by both of them, that what Shan'ann was doing was unacceptable. According to them, you might say it was acceptable, but according to his own parents, they were probably telling Chris this was what was going on, right? Watts probably took whatever they said kind of at face value. He probably wasn't particularly fussed about it, probably didn't care too much about it, probably felt kind of bummed out that he's now got to deal with this when he wants to fantasize about Nicole Kessinger. But you know, when it's his own parents, it was cutting a bit close to home, and I think he felt he had to get involved. And so I think after he spoke to Shan'ann, maybe he said something like, please don't post anything else on Facebook or something. Then she may have texted him or something. Whether those texts survived, we don't know. But he then called her, and they had a 4-minute conversation. He may have had sort of second thoughts and said, look, I don't know. He may have, I don't know what he said to her. And this is also around that same time of when he would leave for work. So 05:25 and 05:32. This is giving us a sense of when Watts was usually awake, right? And when he was available after preparing to go to work, but before he went to work to talk to Shan'ann. Then at 24 minutes past 7, Watts logged into Facebook. Now, what may have happened there is Shan'ann may have said something like, I don't know what you worried about. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what this is all about. I didn't say anything about your parents. And so Watts may have thought, well, which is reality? Are his parents making something up? Or is Shan'ann right? Kind of thing. And so I think he went onto Facebook to kind of find out for himself what is going on. Now, what could also have happened, and I think this is something very few people have thought about, is Nutgate possibly how can I put it? Nutgate possibly caught Watts's attention in the sense that maybe in a way he was sort of drifting completely away from thinking about Shan'ann, thinking about his family, and then what Nutgate did was it sort of roped him back in. And when he went onto Facebook to check whether what Shan'ann had said, to check what Shan'ann had possibly said about his family, possibly this thing of something Shan'ann said or did has upset his parents. Maybe in the back of his mind he's looking at Shan'ann's Facebook and thinking, oh shit, I wonder whether Kessinger can see this. Not the Nutgate stuff, the other stuff, the pregnancy stuff. So it may be that on July 13th, literally 1 month before the murders, I wonder whether Watts didn't go into Facebook. Bear in mind he did this at work. We presume he did this at work because it's 24 minutes past 7. He may have done it on his phone. He may have done it on his work computer. We don't know. I don't know what Anadarko's policy is towards Facebook, but he probably was at the office and Kessinger may have been walking by or something, and now he is looking at his family, at Shan'ann, and he may be thinking, oh shit, what if Kessinger went onto Facebook? What would she see? And that may have been how the seed got planted, that he needs to be careful. He needs to start covering things up. He needs to get rid of things. Does that make sense? Now we don't know again, and this is unfortunate that this wasn't asked in interviews of Chris Watts. It's that he wasn't specifically asked about this. I don't know if Cheryl and Cadel asked him, but it's unfortunate that someone didn't go through the timeline with him and say, okay, what is this about? What is that about? Because it would be interesting to know what did he see when he logged onto Facebook on this particular day. Did he see something that worried him in terms of Nutgate, or didn't he see something? But what is the takeout for him? And maybe the part of the takeout was a sense of concern about what Kessinger might see if she went onto Facebook. At 16:21, so at the end of the day, Watts called Shan'ann and had an 8-minute conversation. So on July 13th, all the calls, unusually, are from Watts to Shan'ann. On all the other days, it's kind of the other way around. It's Shan'ann calling him, Shan'ann calling him. But here, he makes all the calls. And what one can kind of anticipate here is that Watts isn't very happy. He's kind of, maybe in the beginning he lambasted his parents. Maybe in the beginning he set them straight. Maybe he told them what Shan'ann told him to say. But it's possible that by July 13th he'd kind of had a different view of everything. And maybe he sympathized with Shan'ann. Maybe he actually agreed with her. Maybe he felt this isn't right in terms of his children. But then maybe if he found out what Shan'ann had said about his parents, he may have had a either change of heart or maybe he felt ambivalent. Now, some people who've been following the whole Nutgate thing have gotten quite emotional already. I've asked people not to be emotional. It seems like it's impossible for some people. If you get emotional, you are going to just upset yourself. And this isn't about you, believe it or not. Like, you might get some sense of, what's the word? Some of this might resonate with you. You might get a sense that you're not alone in your circumstances, in your family, and that's fine. And there's a conversation to have about that. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out reality. We're trying to figure out what really was going on. and we kind of making inferences and so on. As soon as you get emotional, you can't do that. So if you want to get emotional, you can sort of say, well, that's what I want to do. I want to be angry with Shan'ann, or I want to be angry with Chris Watts, or I want to sort of, for the 100th time, say Chris Watts is a monster, he's guilty, and I hate him. Right? That's not what I'm doing with True Crime Rocket Science, and that's what makes this channel not that popular. I'm not yet to do the popular thing, which is sort of say Chris Watts bad, Shan'ann good, or Chris Watts narcissist, Shan'ann perfect person kind of thing. What I'm trying to do is just look at what happened. And once you know what happened, then you can, after doing that, after figuring out what really happened, then you can say, how does this affect me? How does it affect the decisions I make? How does this affect how I am on social media? Then you can do that. But in a weird way, it's like the blind leading the blind. You see what you want to see. You get upset about what you want to get upset about, but are you actually getting upset about something that's really real? And the other day I heard a video where someone went to visit the well site, and they were talking about how they just feel this incredible emotion approaching the well site. They can just imagine what Cece and Bella were thinking in the truck, as they were heading to this well site. And I thought, wow, I don't think the children were alive, and here you are imagining the scenario, and you're getting so upset and so emotional about a scenario that I don't even think happened. And you might say, no, but Chris Watts said it happened. You might say, but that creator says it happened. That's what I believed all along. Isn't that what the mainstream media say? Isn't that what the police say? It's not what the autopsy says. The autopsy shows the children were dead when they were in the tanks. The autopsy doesn't show that there was any respiration of oil. So, there's some people who I think want to believe that the children were thrown alive in the oil tanks. They seem to want to believe that because they also want to believe Chris Watts is this horrible human being. I'm not trying to say he's a nice human being, but trying to make it worse than it isn't reality either. If you've watched a couple of Shan'ann's videos of the children, and you see how excited they get, you see how they can scream, you see how they can sort of run around, you see how they are easily excited, and now you have a situation where you sort of have a dead body in the trunk or in the back seat, and you're saying, no, that was done on purpose. Chris Watts would have been fine with the children driving with him for 45 minutes with a dead person beside them. And the children were actually desperate to see their mother. They'd spent 6 continuous weeks basically only with their mother, and then she disappeared for 2 days. They couldn't wait for her to come back. She was their primary caregiver. So in a scenario where they were going to come back, where she was going to come back, and when's mommy coming back, and then you wake up the next morning and mommy's there but she's just unresponsive. You're telling me that's not going to cause distress? Bella was already distressed about Nutgate on Saturday night. She was worried that Cece wasn't going to wake up, so she's already distressed, then can't sleep. And what about her mother? When her mother's supposed to have come back from Arizona, and she's apparently come back in Chris Watts' story, but she's not responsive, she's sick. Are you telling me the children aren't going to be screaming and out of control? But apparently people believe this. When one child is strangled in front of the other child, as per what a lot of people believe, as per what Chris Watts said, you really think the other child's just going to sit there? Would you? If someone's strangled right next to you, would you sort of just sit there, say nothing, do nothing? If you were being strangled, would you sort of just go, I think I want to say a prayer? Well, this is what you're being asked to believe, and a lot of people do believe it. And that's why I say, try to put your emotions aside so that you can see what actually happened in this case. And I understand that the emotional narrative is the one that's the more popular one. The one that makes you feel emotional is the one that you want to believe. The one that makes you think, like in a premeditated way, in a calculated way, is the one that's probably less exciting, less troubling, less emotional, less popular. On the 13th of July, that Friday the 13th, Watts spoke to Shan'ann for a total of 25 minutes. Now, this was a guy who was usually trying to get off the phone. He was usually someone where Shan'ann struggled to get hold of him, and also Shan'ann felt like he was always trying to do something else. He was trying to exercise or run or what was the other thing that she said? I think, yeah, run or something else. I think the other thing was working out. And now it's not like that. Now he seems to be calling her, and he seems to be available. And why is he available? I think because he's upset. He may not be angry, but he may be agitated, and he may be sort of contacting Shan'ann to convey feelings about his family, feelings about what she said about them. During 25 minutes, these conversations were probably highly charged, argumentative and aggressive. And this is another area that's difficult to know for sure what's going on, because I think he recanted what he originally said. But Nathaniel Tranastich, the neighbor, said early on, he said, and I think this is caught on body cam, where he says, I heard them flat out screaming at one another, which shows you, although Watts was an introvert, although he was quiet, although he was reserved, he could be pushed where he could get quite upset. And I've provided an example of that during the interrogation, where he's being questioned by Coda and Tammy Lee, where for the most part he's sort of quite like a puppy dog. He sort of does what he's expected to do. Well, not that puppies are actually like that, but basically that he plays ball, right? But there's a point in the interrogation where Tammy says to him, she suggests something to him several times to Watts, and he cuts her off more and more kind of aggressively. He doesn't let her push the discussion into a particular area. I've discussed that previously. I'm not going to deal with it here. What that shows is that Watts's capacity for staying cool isn't limitless, which is kind of obvious. Nobody is kind of Clint Eastwood. Everyone kind of has a breaking point, and so did Watts. And I think when it comes to most of us, if you say something insulting about someone very close to you, especially in public, that may be crossing a line for a lot of people. Now we go to July 14th, 2018. Now, I think what's really interesting here, again, as I said, is if you juxtapose these dates, July 13th was a Friday. July 13th seems like Chris Watts confronted his wife several times, dealt with the Facebook thing the way that he knew how, and then the next day was a Saturday, and the next day him and Kessinger headed to the Mustang Museum in Boulder, and that day Shan'ann made at least 10 unanswered calls to Watts. So the feeling I kind of get is that Watts kind of confronted Shan'ann, took her on, was unusually confrontational, maybe said a few choice words, and then the next day he was scarce. She couldn't get hold of him. Maybe that was intentional. maybe he also used that to his advantage to say, well, look, I don't want to talk to you, but also I can't talk to you because it's a Saturday and I want to talk to somebody else. I'm going to use this to my advantage. Now, bear in mind, July 14th was also the second time Kessinger went to his home. Now, do you think she went to his home really to work out a diet plan? Throughout Saturday in mid-July, exactly a month before the murders, Watts is less available when Shan'ann calls, after being very available the previous day, and investing more of his free time with Nicole Kessinger. He also logs onto Facebook again at 10:19. Why? He did this only a few minutes after Kessinger called him. Now, one wonders whether Kessinger told him about what Shan'ann had said, or whether after Kessinger had spoken to him, he was worried about Nutgate based on Shanann's trying to get hold of him. There's also another possibility, which is, and I've done it myself, you go into Facebook to find the addresses of restaurants. You go into Facebook to find the telephone numbers. That's also possible. On July 14th, Shan'ann made at least 10 unanswered calls to Watts. One of these calls occurred during a 43-minute conversation when Watts and Kessinger were speaking. So, on July 14th, Kessinger and Watts had a 43-minute long conversation. And it's possible during this conversation, Watts kind of confided in Kessinger, just said, kind of frankly, just said, Shan'ann is being horrible to my parents. Something almost happened to Cece and whatever. And it's possible that Kessinger went onto Facebook herself to find out about Nutgate. And if that's the case, then it's also possible that she did know all along that Shan'ann was pregnant, but she was kind of under the impression it was someone else's child, not the day after the murders, not that this was someone else's child and she was told this the day after the murders, but that she was told this much more early on. And she may have also, how can I put it, she may have reasoned that the pregnancy was the cause of them breaking up because of this other man, and also the cause of Shan'ann going to North Carolina for an extended time. We don't know what that story was. But I think Nutgate would have almost shown Kessinger that there are real problems in this marriage. Just think again, if Nutgate didn't happen. First of all, Shan'ann would have figured out probably something weird is going on with Watts that's got nothing to do with her. But also, Kessinger would have been looking for something that's legitimately wrong with his family, because they seem pretty happy. Nutgate kind of provided her perhaps with a sense of hope that things weren't going so well, that Shan'ann wasn't getting along with his parents, and so maybe there was a gap for her. That's why I say Nutgate's quite unfortunate for quite a few reasons. Nutgate was also in some ways unnecessary. You could have gotten upset about it with the person and then kind of left it there. It didn't need to be a weeks-long thing. And ultimately, what's the most unfortunate is it fed into Watts' murderous thoughts. All that enmity and hatred and disagreement fed into this thing of, I need to fix this. I've said this before, the social death was a precursor to the actual death. So in other words, the actual cutting off of his parents and the cutting off of the children in terms of seeing the parents, in a way, was a precursor to the actual death. So it was almost like how he would imagine, well, you're never going to see, in terms of his parents, you're never going to see Shan'ann or the kids ever again. Well, if they die or if they disappear, that's the same thing. And she's made that story available. She's provided that story on a silver platter. He's just kind of manifesting it in his own way that would be the same for his parents, but would benefit him in terms of Kessinger. In all, Watts and Kessinger spoke to each other over the phone for close to an hour, while Watts and his wife spoke less than 12 minutes. So July 14th was quite an interesting day. It was a day of quite a lot of communication, but it was also a day that Watts and Kessinger went to the Mustang Museum, and a day that she came to his home. And through most of this time, Shan'ann is left on the sort of outside. She's sort of on the outs. And probably what Watts felt very strongly on the 14th was, again, the sense of, I really don't want, or let me put it this way, I really want this. I want to be spending my time with this person, not with that person, all the negative crap. I want to be spending time having fun with this person. I don't want to be arguing with that person. I want to get away from that person. I want to get away from all the accoutrements of that person. I want to be with this fresh breath of fresh air. And that can often be unfair in relationships where, people say, you know what, I want to have fun. I want to be happy. I want to enjoy myself. And sometimes in relationships there are dips where things don't work out and you've got to work through them. And obviously commitment can fluctuate where it's at a low level and then someone else is in the picture, and at this point where your commitment is low, you kind of feel like, wow, if I was with that person, I would get a break from this tiring thing. And it's not right. I mean, it's not right to duck out, to jump ship out of your circumstances. Your wife's pregnant, you've got children, you've got obligations. It's not right to do that. It's not ethical. But it is also human nature to want to escape the humdrum and the situation that's always a bummer or a downer. Especially if you're in another situation that makes you feel alive, makes you feel attractive, makes you feel happy, makes you feel like you're coming alive. Now think about Nutgate as almost the opposite. It's all about death. Your mother tried to kill my child. Allergies, sickness, weakness, anger. The whole thing is like a dark cloud. No matter how you deal with it, whether you on Shan'ann's side or his parents' side, the whole thing is a bummer. Whereas Kessinger was providing this alternative. Sex, visit a car museum, take flowers at Roggan or whatever. I don't know, it's just totally different. Watts wanted another life. He didn't want the Nutgate life. If Kessinger was aware Watts was having issues with his wife, she may have offered him advice or even counseling. Did Watts tell Kessinger about Nutgate? Did Kessinger see any of it on Facebook? Based on his lack of communication, Shan'ann had to have been aware on July 14th that things had seriously deteriorated in her marriage. As a postscript, over the same period, the Steelers were playing their games, but in stark contrast to the past, this time there was no family solidarity, no dressing in the same outfits and supporting their team together. So that's it. We will continue with the timeline, with the chronology. It's getting pretty interesting, quite fraught, quite portentous at this point, quite ominous, as we go on to July 15th and further, basically less than a month before the Watts family murders. You can refer to the actual posts on crimerocket2.com. They're in the description. You can refer to the timeline there, and on the right hand side of the posts are links to the Two-Face book series and the Silver Fox series. As I said earlier, Silver Fox, The Third Confession's got a very high rating, so if you want to read a book that I've written on the subject, check that out. And then there's also Two-Face Annihilation is the highest rated book in the 9-part Two-Face series. Each book is kind of built on the platform of the previous book based on the knowledge we had at the time, and each one is a refinement of the theories and the speculations that went on before it. So each one is an improvement. I think Annihilation is the third last book in the 9-part Two-Face series. So I think it is the 7th book of the 9 books. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Look out for the episode on Vincent van Gogh coming after this. As I said, it's an on-camera episode where I will share the third last letter in the 130 years ago timeline. Very interesting analysis and a very interesting part of the chronology that we're dealing with here. Within 2 weeks, Vincent van Gogh would be dead, and mystery still lingers now, 130 years later, around what happened to him. There's still not certainty whether he committed suicide, and if he didn't, who shot him and why. And that's something that I've tried to answer. Once again, not sharing the mainstream narrative, not because I'm trying to sell books or because I'm trying to be funny. I'm just bringing true crime rocket science to bear on a case, and fortunately, just like the many Facebook posts in the Watts case, in the Vincent van Gogh story, there are hundreds of letters, and instead of Facebook photos, there are hundreds of paintings, and these also reveal Vincent van Gogh's mood. You don't need to be an art expert or even know much about art to get a sense of who these people are. I've applied the exact same thing in the Watts case, is trying to find out who the people are and the underlying family dynamics. That is always the key to figuring out motive and ultimately method. How did this crime happen? How did these people die? Why did they die? Also on Patreon, I've already uploaded the first introduction and first chapter in the early access book Madeleine McCann, Beach of Light. They've also just released images of the well where Madeleine McCann was supposedly or possibly disposed of in Villa de Bispo in Portugal. I've actually driven through there. So I put up the first section in the audiobook, the first intro and first chapter. That's on the $10 tier, and I'll be uploading successive chapters every day. Also, the audiobook for the third book in the Two-Face series, Two-Face, Two Pollyannas. We're already into part 2 of that. That's on the $5 tier, also on Patreon. So check that out on Patreon/TCRS. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.